Israel was going to annex 8 or 10% of the West Bank and give the Palestinians 1% in return.
Yes, but if I were to play devil's advocate and
Yeah.
position for Israel for a second, you know, if you can imagine what sole conservative governance would look like here in North America, and I think we can, and we're seeing some of it play out in the States. I mean, the agenda is markedly different than when ultimately you have pushback from a viable political party that's saying, hold tight, let's move. And the reason that we started this discussion with the context of the 1990s and the 2000s is because something very definitive did take place. Now, I'm going to push back on you. You may not believe that what was on offer is the
Yeah.
Israeli position, but the Israeli consensus is that there was a firm rejection of a peace effort. And the push into the settlements, which was taking place in fairness before the peace negotiations, I'm not trying to say it hasn't been happening before, happened with gusto. The settlements that actually came in, that started dividing up the territory, that started making two-state solutions absolutely impossible, took place once there was a crystallized consensus amongst the Israeli population that there was no partner to deal with. And I think that it behooves us to point that particular point out. It doesn't in any
Right.
way negate the fact that
Right.
clearly the political powers that be are working against the two-state solution. They have said so fairly implicitly, have said so implicitly at this time. But it does provide the explanation for what has taken place over the past 15 years.
Yeah, I disagree with parts of that. I actually don't think that you only see the growth of settlements that make a Palestinian state impossible kind of in response. I think if you look at, for instance, the settlement growth continues throughout the 1990s. It doesn't stop at all, even under Rabin and then later Barak. It continues. If you look at a settlement like Ariel, for instance, which was the most difficult sticking point in the Olmert Abbas negotiations, that doesn't start in response to Palestinian rejectionism. There, I think, has been a very strong, consistent pattern of Israel building and expanding settlements throughout, and many of the settlements, even the ones that are in the Jewish community often considered consensus settlements, are actually significant problems for the possibility of Palestinian contiguity. Efrat, for instance, or Ariel kind of basically cuts deep into the northern West Bank, cutting off the northern cities of Kalkilia and Tulkarem for the rest of the West Bank. Efrat is on the major north-south artery of the spine of a Palestinian state. I also think that the truth is, as I read the history of what happened, let's say between Barak and Arafat, 2000, 2001, is that it's not true that Israel offered the Palestinians everything they wanted, even putting aside refugee return. The Palestinians wanted a sovereign state on virtually all of the West Bank. What Israel had in mind was far, far less than that. First of all, it was not going to be a truly sovereign state. Israel was going to have control of the airspace and the telecommunication spectrum. Israel was going to have an indefinite presence in the troops in the Jordan Valley. Israel was going to annex 8 or 10% of the West Bank and give the Palestinians 1% in return, right? So, and there were going to be land corridors that Israel could use if it needed them that would cut across the West Bank to get them from Israel proper to the border with Jordan. So there was a very different idea of what a Palestinian state would look like. What I would say is the Israeli view was essentially a state minus, something that wasn't truly a sovereign state and wasn't truly on all of the West Bank. So, and I think that's where a lot of the establishment Jewish discourse is just at odds with actually the scholarly record here.